Hello, my name is Julia and I organize events for the Paris Review. It is my pleasure to celebrate the launch of our summer issue number 237. The Paris Review is 68 years old this summer. We have had over 6 editors through the decades. Issue 237 was edited by our 5th editor, Emily Nemens. As we launch this fabulous issue, we also welcome a new editor, number 6, Emily Stokes, who is even now working on issue 238. I look forward to introducing you to her later. Tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Lauren Kane, assistant editor at the Paris Review.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight to celebrate the launch of our summer issue. We're so excited to have you all, and I'm actually welcoming you from our Chelsea offices this evening. It was a pleasure to help publish this issue. Thank you to Hassan Althoff and to Emily Nemens, to our interns, and of course to everyone on the staff of the Paris Review for making it happen. We're also so grateful to the contributors who will share their work with us tonight, starting off with Kenan Orhan. Kenan's short fiction has appeared in Prairie Schooner, The Common, Massachusetts Review, and elsewhere. His debut story collection, titled The Birdkeeper's Moral and Other Tales, is forthcoming. Kenan will be reading from his story, The Belu Municipality Waste Management Orchestra.
Hi. Thanks for introducing me. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. So I'm going to read a small segment of the story, starting just a little bit in from the beginning to keep you appraised of the situation. Our narrator has just discovered an instrument in the trash, and she took it home. She did the one thing she's not supposed to do. So now, here we go. There was a new instrument in the composer's trash bin each week. I would, excited as a young girl on her birthday, run up to his bin, peel off the lid, poke my snout inside, and fish out either an immaculate violin, or a viola, or a bow, or a hand-carved music stand, or once even a cello, always placed delicately on a bed of clean newspaper. Mostly, it was easy sneaking them home. I was the last person to put anything in the back of our truck and would hop out of the cab as fast as Neil when we arrived to the dump, so that I could retrieve my newspaper-wrapped treasure before anyone saw it. Then it was quick goodbyes, see you tomorrows, and I was off home with my bundle in the seat beside me. I lived in a closet-turned studio in an old Ottoman mansion that had been partitioned into apartments many decades ago. There wasn't space enough for me and my thoughts at once. However, one claustrophobic afternoon, while cleaning each crevice and corner in my studio, I found a small hatch. It was in the top of my wall, behind a layer of wood panels that were under a covering of stucco. I pulled down the hatch, revealing a ladder. The ladder led me up into the framing of the old house, what you might call an attic if there had been anything but timber and shingles. Indeed, if there had even been a few floorboards. I crawled from beam to beam like an insect. It was a cramped little attic, spreading out only over a small portion of the center of the mansion. Most of the upstairs rooms had the roof of the building as their ceiling. Only in the very center was the space tall enough for me to sit upright. I resolved to make the attic the home for my collection of string instruments, and over the next few days, I took up a few plywood panels and a box of nails. "Quite the racket the birds are making on the roof," said a neighbor. I agreed and speculated it might instead be a large owl or a rodent or even a child climbing around. Over the weekend, I cleaned away the cobwebs and dust, brought up a battery-powered lamp, and constructed a display case. As soon as I finished my renovations, I tucked the instruments into neat and tidy order. I spent my evenings after work sneaking up into the attic to pull one instrument down back into my studio, where I studied it for hours, with no thought in my head other than to marvel in its beauty. One morning, I showed Mehmet the latest violin from the composer's trash. He told me the city's orchestras and philharmonics had been ordered to compose and perform with uniquely Turkish instruments. "Every day it is something new stolen away from us," he said. I thought he was being dramatic, but I remembered now a few things: tampons, waffle makers, coconuts, and then just as quickly we forgot them. As we rode along the Golden Horn toward the dump, we passed at the shore a building that had not been there yesterday. They must have thrown it up overnight, or else when my back was turned. Enormous gray concrete reached from the water to the sky. Next in the old composer's trash, I found an oud, then a saz, then a ney. I worried what it meant that even these traditional instruments were being removed. Was it an act specifically against the old composer? The city of Istanbul woke knowing that books were now banned. We did not talk about it. We did not complain in the markets or at the office about how much this would put us out, but we felt it right in the sockets of our hearts. We simply rose from our beds and set about adjusting, some of us living now as if completely amnesiac regarding the reality before, drowned in a blue fluid of forgetting. Then the morning was filled with hundreds, thousands of narrow columns of smoke creeping up through the cracks of the city to hide the sky in black. People burned their books, but not everyone. Some forgot to do it right away. They were late for work, and so burned them later at the stove while making dinner. Some didn't want to burn them, trusting them instead to the cycle of nature, leaving them to decay in their gardens or in the gutters of Istanbul, flowing then in scraps to the Bosphorus and washing away into the sea. Frugal ones used their pages as toilet paper. Not all books had been banned, though. The last line in the presidential decree read, exempting all religious books, histories of religions, works by religious figures, spy thrillers, murder mysteries, and science and mathematics textbooks, unless containing lines of poetry or else whole poems. There rose for 3 days large columns of black smoke that painted the reflections in the Golden Horn very, very dark. I returned from work one evening to find the 6 or 7 books I had space for in my studio had mysteriously disappeared. Even the cookbook that was not an actual published book, but merely a folder of my mother and grandmother's recipes was gone. I tried picking up the bin, but it wouldn't budge. I squatted and tried lifting with my legs, but it was no use, so I dragged the bin into the alley from its perch, scraping it over the flagstones and into the sun to have a peek. The lid popped off easily enough. Curled up inside, with his knees into his chest and blinking quickly in the light, was the old composer. "I'm the trash today," said the old man. "All right," I said, "but climb on out and get in my cart yourself, or I'll hurt my back lifting you." The old man did as I told him, and after some huffing and grunting, he was tucked into my handcart, not saying a word as I continued my route, not complaining in the least as I made my stops and piled more trash atop him. We went like that until the rubbish was up to his neck, only his pointed head looking over the pile. Though he didn't complain, he wore a harsh frown, one that doubtless took great effort and concentration to maintain. I'd just collected the last bin of the day when the old man said, "Well, off to the incinerator, I suppose." "Yes," I said, "I suppose." "Will it be quite hot?" "Oh yes, quite hot," I told him, and this seemed to bring him relief. "It's just been so damn cold in my apartment, I could do with a change of temperature." "You might not fit in the slot." "I'm not so fat," he said. He was very slim. "It's a narrow slot at the incinerator." The old man nodded with a strange sadness. He must have shrugged his shoulders because some of the trash around his neck curled over and fell out of the cart. "It's terribly hot in my attic," I said, trying to console him. "You could go there instead." This struck me as a perfectly logical situation, in part because while we had been going along, I'd grown nervous over explaining to Mehmet and Hamdi, as well as to our supervisor, why there was a live body in my handcart. It didn't seem like the sort of thing people wouldn't notice, or that they would want to ignore. And just how had I planned to stuff him in the incinerator anyway? The more I went like that down the alley with the old man in my cart, the more I realized he'd become a big headache, because though I admit I'm not very cognizant of the goings-on in my country, I didn't think having a composer in my trash heap was a good thing. That's the way Turkey seemed nowadays. It was impossible to keep track of what could get you in trouble. I resolved then to pile trash all over the old man, to hide him from Mehmet and Ham when they picked me up. I loaded him into the back of the truck myself, telling him to stay quiet, and I offered to drive the truck back to the dump, dropping Mehmet and Hamdi off at their homes on my way. It took some extra care at the dump, but mostly nobody pays much attention to trash. And so with a quick bit of shuffling and waiting for the right heads to turn, I had the old composer in the trunk of my car as I zipped home through the hills over Beyoğlu and into Kuştepe. I pulled down the ladder to my attic and shoved him up the rungs. He was taking his role as garbage very seriously and hardly employed his arms or legs. His movements were half-hearted. When he stepped up into the attic, though, everything in him changed. The lights were out. The space was made darker by the single cataract of sunshine coming from the transom on the far wall. I pulled the hatch closed behind us and heard, in the darkness, the small sounds of secretive, embarrassed weeping. "You're safe here," I said, trying to console the old man, but he shook his head and slumped to the floorboards, reaching his arms out in front of him. I had to crawl on my hands and knees to get to the light switch. When I threw it on, I found the old man bent over one of the violins. My violin, he said. He held it to his chest, clutching it fast and wiping his tears away. I thought it had been burned or broken or compacted into a small cube. My violin. His two cellos, the other violin, the viola, the saz, the oud, the ney, they were there, waiting for him in the dark, waiting for him to notice each of them in turn and display the same tenderness in their reunion ritual. He did so, not quite, but running his hands over their bends and grains, the way one reassures a lover of one's presence.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, I wanted just to talk to you quickly about what you read. And, I was thinking that given that this story is kind of about being transfixed by things found in the trash, I'd love to hear you maybe speak a little bit about the artist's or the writer's relationship to waste, to discarded ideas. How is waste and how is that crucial to the creative process, if you think it is? Do you ever find yourself admiring ideas you throw away, like your narrator admires the instruments she finds or something?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I will say that I think writing is a little special, perhaps not unique, especially with digital art forms becoming more and more mainstream and stuff. But writing isn't expensive to be wasteful. It's not throwing away a huge canvas full of very expensive oil paints. But I think it's an integral part to writing. Especially in my process, I tend to write a lot of garbage. So I throw away large chunks of whatever I write and it'll never see the light of day. But I also think that's a given for most things in general, but then especially any generative creative art. You have to come up with a lot of crap first. You have to be really bad, sometimes for a really long time, sometimes for just a normal amount of time. But you've got to create a lot of waste. And though I think this story deals with a very different kind of waste and its concerns with space that writing just doesn't have to worry about with the invention of the hard drive. I don't think any writer out there who says that they're not generating a lot of written waste to get to their stuff is much more intelligent than me, or also just fibbing. But it's a crucial part, I think, to writing, is creating stuff. And then that's the fun part, like you say. I dive back all the time because I find myself obsessed with the same stories over and over, the same small things. So I'll write maybe, 50 pages for a story that ends up being 25, and then an editor says, well, it's got to be now 20. And I don't get rid of that stuff. I don't have to. I hold on to that, save it in a file. And every now and again, it'll come back and it'll find its way into another story. So it's a bit like recycling that way instead of being purely destructive.
Or keeping everything in your attic. Exactly.
The other option.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Kenan.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's see. Next is Ada Limón, and she'll be reading her poem Power Lines. Ada is a current Guggenheim Fellow, and she is the author of 5 poetry collections, including The Carrying, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. Ada couldn't join us live, but we are very glad to have a video of her reading, so we'll be able to hear the work in her voice.
Hi, my name is Ada Limón, and so thrilled to be in the Paris Review in this issue. Thank you. This is my poem, Power Lines. Power Lines. 3 guys in fluorescent vests are taking down a tree along my neighbor's fence line, which is, of course, my fence line, with my 2 round-eyed snakes and my wandering raccoon. That is, if you go in for ownership. My. For weeks, the tree they're cutting grew tight with a neon pink band around its trunk. A marking so you knew it was going to die. Must have been at least 50 years old. a non-fruiting mulberry with loads of winter creeper crawling up the bark. Still, it hung low by the power lines, its fruitless limbs leaning over the wire like it didn't care one bit about power, just inching up toward the sun under the hackberry. The men are laughing between chainsaw growls, the metal jaws of machinery. It is a sound that sounds like killing. I can barely listen. But then they are conversing in Spanish, and it brings me a mercy to hear them make a joke about the heat, the lineup of jobs that day. Once, my friend Mundo wanted palm fronds for his patio, so he put on an orange shirt and climbed a towering palm right in the center of town. No one ever questions a Mexican in an orange shirt, he said, and we clinked glasses around his new tiki bar. My grandfather worked for Con Edison for years. I thought power was something you could control, something one could do at a desk or at a job site, work in the field of power. Now, the tree is gone. The men are gone. Just a ground down stump, where what felt like wisdom once was. Thank you again.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Kaveh Akbar, who will be reading two poems from the summer issue, Famous Americans and Why They Were Wrong, and An Oversight. Kaveh is the author of Calling a Wolf, and the editor of the Penguin Book of Spiritual Verse, and he is the poetry editor at The Nation. His second collection, Pilgrim Bell, will be published this August. Thanks for joining us, Kaveh.
Thanks so much. It's a privilege to be here and to be among these readers. This poem is called Famous Americans and Why They Were Wrong. A ribbon around an oak tree reads, "Brother, the oak's roots sinking deeper into the dirt. A heart can sink too, like a root or a library whose architect forgot to factor in the weight of its books. First you lose romance, then fiction, history. At the center of a heart is data, the same idiot degradation that turned the stars into us. I hope somebody forgets you today too. I hope somebody cuts that ribbon free. And this is my other poem in the issue. Thanks to everyone who put the issue together, from the other contributors to the editors, poetry editors, Vijay Seshadri, who is an incredible poet himself, and everyone. This poem is called An Oversight. I murdered my least defensible vices, stacking them like bodies in the surf. An armada of nurses rode in to cherish the dead. Try harder, little moons, they said to the corpses, spooning eggplant into each mouth. Winter followed winter. Horses coughed blood into the sand. Some pain stays so long, its absence becomes a different pain. They say it's not faith if you can hold it in your hands, but I suspect the opposite may be true, that real faith passes first through the body, like an arrow. Consider our whole galaxy staked in place by a single star. I fear we haven't said nearly enough about that.
Hi, thank you. In looking at these two poems, I've been looking at how they both end with like first person statements, and in Famous Americans, it's a line of hope, and in Oversight's fear. But I wonder if you you see yourself as the speaker of the poem throughout, or if you come in and out with those first person lines.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good observation and not one that I had considered before you mentioned it about these two poems, the turn towards the first person there at the end. So much of this stuff is this sort of Here Be Dragons area of the map, what happens in the process of composition. And both of these poems actually began their lives. Kenan was talking about writing a lot of stuff and then whittling down. And both of these poems began their lives as much longer poems, as my poems tend to. And sometimes they get whittled down to just, there are poems in this new book that are just a couple lines long. And so I think that happened here, and somehow the orientation or the short sort of tonal shift from the observed world into the observed external world, into a reflection or a personal reflection, is maybe a sort of, I don't know, synecdoche of a larger project of watching, of attention as a form of devotion. But again, I mean, it's all sort of just trained instincts and what seems interesting to me in the moment. I think that the poems go out a little bit ahead of me, hopefully. And so I always feel a little bit like I'm just sort of applying logic to a thing after the fact and trying to like pretend like I was doing something meaningful, when in reality it's just sort of courting such moments. Sorry, it's kind of a cop-out answer.
No, I thought that was a beautiful answer. And thank you for trying to articulate for us some of the more instinctual pieces of writing poetry. Are you a note taker? Do you take notes?
Yeah. I mean, my house is, I'm in Italy right now, but my house is full of notebooks. My phone has hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes apps. I have thousands of pages on my computer of just, I do.
Wow, that makes the clarity of these really all that more striking. So it's
Thank
great
you.
to have you. Yeah, of course. I should thank everyone who's joined us this evening. From everyone at the Parish Review, we're wishing you a safe and happy summer and a lovely evening, and have a good night.